Welcome back to another video with Scruffy Tales. Today I was thinking of taking a look at the situation in Ukraine. I was planning on doing a couple of videos on this subject early on as I started this channel, but never really got around to it. I had a script ready for some thoughts concerning Bakhmut as that battle was beginning to escalate, but obviously didn't do anything with it. But now I have figured why not? Why not take a look at what has happened and what might happen in Ukraine? I figured we could start with taking a look at the Russian offensive. We all know what has happened so far: little overall gains, unsustainable casualties, and the horrific meat grinder at Bakhmut. But despite the chaos, there has been some logic to it all. The offensive saw Russia attacking basically along the entire length of the Eastern Front, from Volodar in the south to Kupiansk in the north, and eventually we started to see that Russia made some headway at a couple of places. This might have seemed a bit random, Russia attacking without any clear objectives and just waiting to see what works, which is probably not entirely untrue, because I think what Russia put into action was a classic Soviet strategy known as deep battle. In simple terms, deep battle means that you attack the enemy on a wide front. You do this to force the enemy to defend as much area as possible so that they have a hard time to allocate resources and manpower. And you keep this up, this wide and broad attack. The enemy has to keep all troops in place and needs to supply them all with resources, reinforcements, ammunition, food and fuel, and so on, all along the front. Unsurprisingly, after a while, there will be areas where the defenders will not be able to hold on. Defenses might hold at 8 places out of 10, but there will be places where the attackers eventually get the upper hand. So it's not what we traditionally would call a blitzkrieg, with a concentrated effort to pierce enemy lines at a specific place and then start surrounding enemy units. That aspect is part of deep battle, but not to the same extent. Instead of attacking a predetermined position, you wait for that position to emerge as the battle unfolds, and then you commit to essentially a thunder run when you pierce deep into enemy territory to attack vital locations. And this is kinda what we saw early on in the Russian offensive. Lots of attacks with no real gains, Ukraine holding on. From Russia's perspective, that was all according to plan, because Ukraine was forced to portion out its troops and resources to all these battles taking place along the entire length of the front line. So while the West was saying that Russia was failing and Russia didn't know what it was doing, I am of the opinion that Russia actually knew what they were doing, and things were happening as they had planned, for the most part. We then saw Russia gaining ground at a couple of locations. If this was because Russia had planned to push here all along, or if these were weak points in Ukraine's lines that Russia could exploit thanks to deep battle, that is a bit unclear, obviously. But we eventually started to see Russia gaining ground at Kremina, Solidar, and later on at Avdiivka. And it fits with deep battle, a huge attack along a wide front that eventually creates 2 or 3 points where you can exploit an advantage and push through. So what do you want to do when you create a breach and push through? Well, according to Deep Battle, you need to be ready to fully exploit such a breach in the enemy line and send in as many troops as possible, and not only start outflanking enemy units at the front, but go deep into enemy territory and attack supplies, artillery, and command outposts, securing bridges, roads, and towns. So you tie up the enemy forces along the entire front, find a breach, and then push through and force the enemy lines to collapse by outflanking them and attacking their rear all at the same time. Clearly, this part has not worked for Russia, but we can see signs of what they probably hope to achieve. From Kremina, they set out to secure a number of bridges, I assume, as we can see in this picture. And the push at Soledar and Avdiivka tells us how they tried to encircle Ukrainian territory. Just look at how Russia used the breach at Soledar to gain ground. Yes, they fought in Bakhmut, but the real breakthrough was Soledar. And as you can see from Soledar, you can push north to link up with Kremina by taking the bridges Sakitne and Sarichne. If Russia had worked operationally and tactically, then Siversk would have been lost most likely. And looking at Avdiivka, we can clearly see the Russian attempts at surrounding the town. And if this had succeeded earlier on, then Toretsk could have been surrounded in the next phase. Even at Vuhledar, we can see signs of how Russia probably wanted to envelop Ukrainian positions. And if we are honest, the Russian strategy doesn't look all that bad. It almost worked after all. They managed to find a couple of locations where they could force Ukraine to fall back. So strategically, things looked good for Russia. However, operationally and tactically, it was a different story. Vuhledar is a prime example. Russian tactics just doesn't cut it. Tanks driving time and time again into minefields, over and over again driving across open fields and getting sniped by Ukrainian ATGMs and getting hit by artillery. And at Bakhmut, they would throw soldiers into the meat grinder and just keep wasting lives in hopes of overrunning Ukrainian positions. So strategically, Russia found the locations where they could push through Ukrainian lines. Operationally, they failed to provide support and logistics. And tactically, well, I'm not sure you can say that Russia has used tactics. Tactics is supposed to keep your own troops alive. That is the whole point of tactics, to enter into deadly combat, but still keep as many friendlies alive as possible. That is not exactly what Russia is known for in this war. So yes, I believe that strategically Russia had a good plan. Operationally, they failed since they haven't provided the troops with ammunition, proper reinforcements, supplies, or medical care. Tactically, does Russia even rely on tactics, or do they make it up as they go along? Imagine for a moment had Russia relied on proper tactics, even the most basic ones, and made sure that logistics and command and control was in working order operationally. Then perhaps we would have seen the push out of Kremina link up with the troops advancing north from Soledar. Bakhmut would have been surrounded instead of having turned into a meat grinder. Avdiivka would have been surrounded as well. And all of a sudden, Russia could have pushed even further west into Ukraine. Thankfully, this never happened. Thankfully, Russia has failed completely with its offensive, even though it is still slowly ongoing, mainly around Bakhmut. And we can't forget that Russia has been gaining ground since the start of the year. They are pushing slowly into Ukrainian territory, trying to widen their breaches so they don't overextend like they did at the start of the war. And this is actually a sign of Russia doing something right on an operational level. They gain territory, costless it may be, and then try and secure it by expanding around the gains they've secured, instead of following a narrow road only to get ambushed and cut off. And this is a bit worrying, to be honest. Strategically, they have found where they can break through Ukrainian lines. Operationally, they are securing the territory they gain. If Russia gets its act together tactically, Ukraine could be in trouble. So far, that doesn't seem to be the case. Russian troops seem to not rely on the best tactics or any tactics, which obviously works in Ukraine's favor. But despite this long rant about what Russia has failed at and what could have happened, we must not forget the real reason why Russia is failing in this war. It is because of the courage and bravery of the Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the front line, fighting to hold the enemy back, to make them pay for every inch of ground they gain, fighting for freedom. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video interesting, and I hope I can convince you to take a look at my next video. See you around. Go på marsch, Ukraine!